Hey guys, it's Dave. Welcome back for another video. If you're new to the channel, I do hope you'll hit subscribe by the end of the video if you do enjoy the content. And if you are not new to the channel, as always, every like does help out the algorithm showing the video to more people. So both those things are appreciated very much. Been a while since my last video, unfortunately. Life has kind of gotten in the way a little bit lately, as it tends to do. But we've had some massive news today, and I really just wanted to hop on and talk about it. And this is Relativity completely scrapping their Terran-1 rocket. I'm going to be honest, I did not see this coming at all. Let me know down in the comments if you thought this was a possibility, because I really didn't see this one coming. The company's not going under, obviously. They're moving on, focusing on their larger Terran-R rocket, but we've also gotten a lot of updates around this rocket, which is one that has been extremely fascinating for a lot of reasons, and these changes to this Terran-R rocket are absolutely massive. So definitely a massive pivot from Relativity, and I really just wanted to dive into it, take a look at these changes, take a look at the failure of the Terran-1, the update we had from the Anomaly from the company, and what I think this all means for the future of the launch industry as a whole, including Rocket Lab and all the other players in launch. Definitely very big news, and will have repercussions for years to come. So to start off with, I just wanted to take a quick look at the Anomaly update that was given for the Terran-1 rocket. If you'll recall, this rocket launched, most people felt it was a relatively successful launch. Their first stage successfully made it up to the proper altitude and released the second stage. The second stage, however, failed to ignite properly, and then the obviously payload didn't reach the intended orbit. But looking into the Anomaly, we're saying that following stage separation at 163 seconds, stage 2 igniter valves were commanded to turn on at plus 166 seconds into the flight, and the igniter performance appeared nominal, which is basically normal or correct. And then a few seconds later, the telemetry diverged from their expectations and the engine did not reach full thrust. The investigation is still underway, but the preliminary findings are that the main engine valves opened slower than expected, which impacted the pressures in the system and the timing of the propellant reaching the thrust chamber assembly. When power was applied to the turbines, the fuel pump generated pressure as expected, but the oxygen pump did not, which also impacted pressure and the timing of propellant reaching the TCA again. Due to these off-nominal propellant pressure timing, the engine did not light and did not reach full power. So good update there on what happened with the second stage, but I'm still absolutely shocked that they decided to cancel this rocket. Blown away, really. Let's go into their update and their reasoning behind these moves. Today, Relativity revealed plans for their Terran-R, their reusable 3D printed, medium to heavy, I would say heavy more than medium, lift orbital launch vehicle, building on over 7 years of Relativity Space's experience, learnings, and momentum gathered through its Terran-1 program. You know, a lot of hype speak, I guess, there. Basically, they revealed new plans. And really, 7 years of work on Terran-1, and now it's scrapped. We're moving on to a new vehicle, which is going to take longer than they were originally saying to reach orbit. So 7 years of work, and we're still not going to get any revenue until at least 2026. Probably, I would say 2027 or beyond. That's pretty tough, but they do have a considerable chunk of change in the bank, or at least they raised a considerable amount of money. We don't have visibility into how much they've spent at this point, but they did raise well over $1 billion, so they should have some money to hopefully make it through this. Going on with the Terran-R architecture, it will prioritize first stage reusability now, whereas when they originally announced the rocket, they were planning on having both first and second stage reusability. And that was the real exciting thing about Relativity, if you ask me. Not so much that their rockets were 3D printed, because to me, like, if it's amazing rocket is an amazing rocket, regardless of how it happened to be made, as long as they can make it for the right price and have, you know, amazing capabilities. Whether or not it's 3D printed is really neither here nor there. But the fact that they said they were going to be able to go for full reusability, something nobody has successfully done yet. SpaceX is chasing it with their Starship, and in order to achieve that, they've had to go absolutely massive in order to make the numbers really work, which is what I think Relativity has found here. Basically, Terran-R was going to be fully reusable, but being much smaller. And I thought, you know, if they could really pull that off, while I did have my doubts, if they really did pull that off, it'd be an absolute game changer for Relativity, for the entire industry. It'd be absolutely massive. But now we learn they've realized they can't really pull it off as of yet. They're prioritizing just first stage reusability. The capability will be for launching 23,500 kilograms to low Earth orbit. So an extremely massive vehicle. That's really about twice the size of Neutron in terms of mass to orbit. So definitely fairly large. And if they're going to expend the rocket up to a maximum payload of 33,500 kilograms. So definitely a very large rocket, much larger than Neutron, much larger than the Falcon 9, larger than most other rockets in operation right now, although we do have a lot of big ones in the works, you know, New Glenn, Starship, Terran-R, all these, but definitely a massive rocket they're planning to work on. Terran-R is a 3D printed rocket, they say, with initial versions using aluminum alloy tanks, straight section barrels in a hybrid manufacturing approach. Now, this is extremely interesting because Relativity has been going on since they started the company, that their big advantage, the big thing they had going for them, was the fact that they were 3D printing almost the entire rocket. And now it seems like they've finally admitted some sections of the rocket, it just doesn't really make sense to 3D print. Some sections it does, and other companies also use 3D printing. Rocket Lab was the first one to have a 3D printed engine to orbit, and Rocket Lab uses 3D printing as well, and definitely there are some very useful scenarios for 3D printing, but there's also some scenarios where it doesn't make sense. And I think they've just kind of realized, okay, with the body, with the tanks, maybe it doesn't make too much sense. Just want to hop over here and show you a quick video of the 3D printing process they were doing for the Terran-1 rocket, their first rocket. So if we scroll down, we can see this is their 3D printer literally building the rocket, melting tiny pieces of metal here and letting them cool and dry, spinning this around, and this is incredibly sped up. This process is actually extremely slow, and you can even see in this video all these little bumps and artifacts that are coming from the 3D printing process. To me, it just never was that efficient. It would take forever to 3D print these tanks, these components. Back to the announcement here. They say there is overwhelming market demand, including servicing their currently signed customer backlog of $1.65 billion. Obviously a massive backlog there, but we're going to look into that later. The in-launch service agreements and additional active customer dialogue. So those are customers that haven't signed agreements, but they're talking to. Personally, I wouldn't put much stake in active customer dialogue. I want to see pens on paper and signatures on contracts. So the 1.65 number is what we'll go with right now, but I'm going to dive into that a little bit later on. And a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen with the backlog for the Terran-1 rocket. Well, it wasn't that huge to begin with. I know they did talk about it a lot, but most of their backlog was already for the Terran-R rocket, which is still many years down the road. The company intends to design major parts of the vehicle for 20 reuses right away, with strategic development of reuse criteria and rapid learning from flight data to continuously improve successive block upgrades. So that's not the end goalpost, that's just the first block. So apparently customers' urgent needs are for these large rockets, at least according to Relativity at this point. So that's why they're prioritizing just getting it going with only the first stage reuse. And then they say here, as a testament to its commercial viability, Relativity has currently launched service agreements that amount to more 1.6 billion. Yeah, we already talked about that. But interesting here, only 7 customers. So when you see that 1.65 billion number, sounds massive, right? It sounds like, wow, they've got a huge backlog. Only 7 customers, not a huge number. So it's just a few contracts. And how real are these contracts really? We're going to go into that in a little bit more detail later on. Ars Technica article from the great Eric Berger. I always love to read his articles. And we have Terran-1 and done. Funny headline there. Relativity Space is not going to launch again until at least 2026. Their former goal was 2024 for Terran-R, and obviously we assumed that they were going to keep launching Terran-1 in the meantime, but that is no longer the case anymore. The new plan significantly changed from what was first announced back in June of 2021. Second stage now expendable, as we did already here, at least for several years, because it does not make economic sense to fly these stages back, said CEO Tim Ellis. The mass penalty in terms of propellant was just too high. One day the company may make a fully reusable vehicle. And this was always my confusion. I thought one of the main reasons SpaceX went so massively big with Starship is that they really had to in order to make the numbers work for full reusability. And when Relativity came along and said Terran-R is going to be fully reusable and a much smaller vehicle than Starship, I was just so confused. And now we see the mass penalty is just too high. It doesn't seem like it's making sense right now. So a little bit of coming back to reality here for Relativity. So the fully reusable first stage will be capable of 20 reflights, as we saw. They're moving away from an approach to additively manufacturing the entire rocket. The rocket will still be 3D printed, they say, but initial versions at least will use aluminum alloy straight section barrels. So a more traditional approach to rocket manufacturing. The rocket will now be powered by 13 Aeon engines instead of the 7 engines they had previously, and it will give the rocket a thrust of 3.35 million pounds, comparable to Blue Origin's New Glenn, which sits at 3.85 million pounds. So they'll be competing, if New Glenn ever launches, they'll be competing with New Glenn as well. Apparently, their former launch target date was 2024. That was just an aspirational date. It was never really realistic. They're now being more realistic and setting a launch goal of 2026. So many changes here. Biggest one is moving away from fully reusable launch. As I said, that was really the big draw for Relativity, in my opinion, and that's now gone. Massive news for the company. And we just get a image here of their new design. We have the more engines, we have the aerostrakes, the grid fins, and then the upper stage, as well as information on the payload fairing and the second stage, all that information. Not a ton of detail, but that's what it looks like, at least right now. So, all that out of the way, I just wanted to discuss this update and my thoughts on it. First of all, you know, I was never too worried about Terran-1 as a competitor for Rocket Lab because of that payload amount being 1 ton, very much larger than Electron and yet very much smaller than Neutron. So it wasn't really competing directly with either of those rockets. And this does make me wonder about Firefly now, because if Relativity is deciding to scrap this rocket already, Firefly is working on a rocket very much in the same payload area. I wonder how much demand there is for that rocket. Otherwise, you got to imagine Relativity would have continued with their Terran-1 if the demand was there. The launch was actually considered successful by most people. Most experts in the industry considered the progress to be pretty impressive. They successfully launched, they successfully separated their second stage, and yes, they had those problems with their second stage, but still it didn't blow up on the pad. They got through max Q, which was a big question mark, and they really made a lot of progress. So to scrap it here is a big head scratcher unless there's questions around demand or some other issues, because now we're looking at no revenue for the company until probably 2027, I would say. Definitely a little bit of an awkward place to be, and I definitely will be keeping a closer eye on Firefly now at this point to see how their rocket fares and whether there is a market for that 1 ton range. So According to a legend in our Discord, Mr. Danny Chance, thank you for your comments as always. Very knowledgeable guy about the rocket industry. He did mention that according to Ellis, they are already spending at least a couple $100 million a year on their rocket development, and their last funding round was back in mid-2021. It does seem like there's going to be a good chance they'll need to raise more money, and the environment is no longer anywhere near as friendly to raising capital as it used to be. We saw obviously Virgin Orbit couldn't raise any money to save themselves from bankruptcy. Astra's been having trouble raising money. Everyone out there in the new space industry that wants to raise money has had a difficult time of it lately. So definitely not a great place to be in terms of having to raise more money. And even when it does launch in 2026, likely they'll need quite a while before they can get their cadence up and reach full profitability. I know in my Neutron model, I don't have Neutron reaching profitability for several years after beginning their launches. So it's not just like as if you hit your first launch and you're good to go from there. Still a long road after that. I've also said before I wouldn't have invested in Rocket Lab if they were just the rocket company. I really love the space systems, the space applications side of the business that they're building out. And even if you look at SpaceX, launch has never really been their cash cow up to this point. They haven't really, despite doing incredibly innovative things, they've not really been a profitable company basically at any point. Now they're finally getting into space systems and building out their Starlink constellation, and that's looking like it'll be the cash cow. So launch really enables the space systems, but I think you do want space systems under your belt as well to really capture that value higher up in the value chain and make the big bucks, not just the small margins from launch. And Relativity does not have that right now, so that is another big concern I would have with the company. Now let's go back and talk about their backlog right now. They had about 1.65 billion in backlog. They claimed 7 customers. Let's talk about the customers I know about at least. So first of all, we have OneWeb's Gen 2 constellation. Now, this is actually a really big contract for the company, and OneWeb has infamously had contracts with all sorts of players that fell through. They had deals with Russia before current events caused them to have to scrap that deal. They've had deals with Virgin Orbit, which obviously fell through. So I wouldn't say this one is locked in stone. OneWeb has also gone through bankruptcy, I believe, more than once. It's really been a struggle of a company. They've been bailed out several times. They finally seem like they're going to be able to operate their constellation, but I wouldn't consider a contract from OneWeb for launches starting maybe 2026, 2027 to be a safe bet by any means. The future is still out for this company, I would say. We'll see what happens with them. I do wish them the best with their constellation. I hope it's a success, but they do have quite a colorful history. There is, I would say, a lot of question marks around that contract. Next one, they have discussions with NASA. Obviously, it's always great having NASA as a customer, and they have been named as a potential launcher under a new type of contract along with Rocket Lab and others. But obviously with Terran-1 being canceled, we'll see what happens with NASA. I have my doubts how many contracts they will get, at least until the rocket has proven itself a little bit more. Then we have Impulse. I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, I think it was 2021, they announced a deal with Impulse Space to send a couple craft to Mars. Now, Impulse has never done anything this ambitious to my knowledge, and neither has Relativity. So this contract, from both sides of it, when it was announced, there was a lot of head scratching in terms of, well, is this even real? Like, it's a rocket that doesn't exist with for a company that doesn't have their landers yet, and it will not be able to build them for several years, may not have the money to do it. It was a very aspirational deal on both sides, hoping the other side will come through. But that's another contract, I say, up in the air. Who knows what'll happen? And then we have Iridium, a deal for up to 6 launches. Now this is, I would say, more of a real contract, and Iridium is very much a real player in the space industry. 6 launches is a decent number. It's not a massive constellation, but definitely a decent number. And I don't know if Iridium is really going to want to wait as long as it may take for this new rocket to start working. We'll wait and see, but I think there's a reason why Rocket Lab and Peter Beck have not announced contracts yet for Neutron. And that is because it's so far out, it just doesn't really make sense. You don't know yet when exactly you'll be launching. The potential customers don't know when they'll be ready to launch yet. And there's so much uncertainty in that it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So we'll see what happens with that one. Iridium's definitely, I think, more real than the other ones. But in all these contracts, the financial terms have not been really disclosed. So I don't know how real I would consider some of these deals as opposed to something another company would be signing where they're going to be ready to launch for sure in 6 months or something like that. So yes, they have the backlog. We'll see what happens to it. Is there anything going to shake out that could fall to Rocket Lab? I don't see a lot of that happening. I haven't heard any high-profile launches on Terran-1 that would make sense to land with Rocket Lab, but I guess we'll see what happens. Another competitor out of the marketplace in terms of rockets. Wouldn't it be bad for Rocket Lab, even though it's not a direct competitor? But remains to be seen. I'm more just shocked that Relativity would put 7 years of hard work into this rocket and then just scrap it after what was, by all accounts, a mostly successful first launch. Really shocking news to me. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. I'll be sure to check them out. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button down below and give me a like if you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.